I'm Vin.
I'm Sori.
And this is Epica-Kingdom of Heaven for the big homie... John. There are multiple ways to get your song reviewed, dear listener. My favorite one is the community option. $1 at the gate at Patreon gets you in. And it opens up the door to a treasure trove of community, friendship, fun, Dungeons and Dragons. What's the other game? I keep forgetting. Minecraft, the whole 9 yards. There's a video coming at some point, inshallah. Shout out to the big homie Tina.
Seems like there's lots of things they have going on in there that, you know.
It's an evolving thing.
Yeah.
It's an evolving thing that evolves with the community. Eventually, Zonia is gonna put out a video and show everybody all the goodies. But
in the meantime.
So that's $1 gets you access to all that stuff. The website is about 88% done, and so that also is going to get you into the backstage VIP section on the website. So that's coming soon, all for $1, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you're a filthy capitalist like Sori and my buddy John here, you can skip right to the...
Oh my gosh, how dare you insult both of us in the same sentence.
Once you join an alliance, you actually you pull your points together and you guys determine, in many cases, what songs we review. Okay, so if you want to take the filthy capitalist option and zoom to the head of the line because of your
some people know what they want.
You can leverage your capital. Well, I'm looking for the headphones. They're about to start. Then you can do what the big homie John did. $125 gets you zoomed straight to the head of the line. And this is a song that people have been asking us for quite some time. So
all you villagers can thank the big homie John.
Thank you for your patience, big homie. And to all the other ones, we're going back into the lab for a massive recording session in a couple of days. So thank you all for your patience, and let's do it. This is Epica-Kingdom of Heaven. Let's go. Sounds like a DMT thing.
of disappointment.
Internet
not your time. You have to go back. Back.
I don't want to return. Please, let me stay here. Don't make me go back.
Go back. You've got work to do. We're not alone. We are
Nothing here will be the same. The smallest bit is as big as nature. Our limited capacities give us trouble to comprehend. We are linked in every way, and we're strong as the weakest fragment. Every word that we convey is an act with consequences.
It's ending. Rewind it. What in the freaking
Yep.
world?
That was definitely, yes.
God Almighty! What a freaking song!
Yeah, that
Good
was really good.
Lord!
That was really good.
Good God
So much
Almighty!
variation of music, but put together so well.
Yeah, the first 4.5
It was
minutes they were
epic.
riding that. They were riding that one.
Epic.
That one riff, you know, that.
Yeah.
That's a classic riff, and they reimagined it in a pretty cool way. Wow.
When it got to this part,
Which one? Yeah, I knew you were gonna zone out.
oh my
I
god.
knew you were zoning out right there. Yeah. What in the world?
Oh my word.
Good God Almighty! This is a very epic song. Good Lord.
Sense why people kept saying, listen to it.
Yeah, no, I was like, oh, man. I never even. Every time we do a Nightwish song, something like this would pop up. Ghost Love Score was like my favorite. Because I put these guys in the same genre of Nightwish. This band.
Oh, absolutely. I kept hearing
And
what they sound like
Ghost
before.
Ghost Love Score was my favorite song in that genre, but I don't know. I'm not
That
sure.
was really good.
And he's sick. Well, it's interesting. I don't know how much the guy because the guy John sent me an email, and so I don't know how much I can share. But
Oh, really? I did not read the email, so.
Please don't be mad at me, but he basically said, I was dead for a minute 30 years ago. And I have 30 years of thinking behind me. So, I don't know how old the big homie is, but he had, I'm assuming he had some sort of near-death experience because that's what's in the song. Like the person dies and then
clearly.
It was really interesting.
Babe, which one of these did you pick for the lyrics?
Kingdom of Heaven, that one, the first one, the top one. It was really interesting the way they did the near-death experience because usually, like, I've heard people say, my mom had one that she told us about, and it was kind of the similar thing, like, I want to stay here, and they're like, no, you got to go back, and da-da-da, and it was more like a spoiled child type of energy, like, come on, and he's like, no, I'm sorry, honey, you got to go back, and da-da-da-da. But this one was like the person was terrified to come back here.
Yeah.
And our current zeitgeist considered, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, it's really interesting to me, like, when I think about claustrophobia, right? Like, I think one of the greatest, like, fears that a person can have would be the, like, fear of, like, being buried alive, right? Like, but it's like, if you think about being in the womb, like, you're basically almost buried alive.
Yeah, you just don't know anything different.
You don't know anything different, but then when you come out and you experience all the space and the freedom of living in the world,
they don't like it at first.
The concept of going back into that is terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's how I think. Like that's how I think it is in the next world. Like if we actually got a taste of what the next world would be like, we would be terrified.
Yeah. Even if like right now, I feel like everybody's like, oh my word, I would leave this in an instant between COVID and all the other social issues and stuff like that. But I think even if it was the best year of your friggin' life and you crossed over, you would still be begging to stay and not wanting to come back. Right.
But I like the way he did it because the guy was like terrified to come back. And I think
that like voice was like getting angry. No. You're going.
Yeah, I'm not sure that because I've had Jesus mad at me a couple times, but it's always
not like that.
It's not like that.
Well, that was St. Peter, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you know, the angels are not as patient as God is. Remember, what's his face, John the Baptist's dad? He was like, oh no. And he's like, since you didn't believe in me, I'm striking you, God. What?
Oh, he did.
This guy had no patience whatsoever.
Yeah, and then back when Sarah laughs, remember? Like, that was Jesus, right?
That was Jesus. He goes, well, you did
laugh.
Why
are the kids vacuuming right now?
He said you did laugh. Though.
It's 11:32.
Stand by. Somebody's about to have a near-death experience.
It's Johan. He's thinking that just tell him to use the broom.
He's lazy. That's what. Johan! Hey!
We got this vacuum cleaner.
Johan!
And like within like a day, it started making this you can hear it, this ridiculously loud noise. So now anytime that the kids are using it, it's like so obnoxious. It's not just like a regular vacuum. I'm not gonna buy another one. We're hoping to move soon, so I'll get one when we move. But so it's so friggin' loud that like, and we live in an apartment complex, so everybody can hear like this vacuum cleaner is ridiculous.
Anyway, did you entertain the locals?
I did. I told them what was going on with the vacuum. But anyway.
Yeah. So Jesus. He said, but you did laugh.
Right. He didn't
strike her with
That's what I'm
blindness.
He's like, I'm not gonna let you laugh.
Yeah.
I mean, you did laugh.
Yeah. But Gabriel shows up. The guy has one little inkling of doubt. Oh, you're not gonna believe me?
I mean, the reason she laughed is because she doubted.
Correct.
But Jesus is like, well, don't lie about it.
Yeah.
You have doubt that we can deal with
I think when Gabriel showed up, Jesus was like, hey, come on, like dumbness, like you can't, like he can't talk. I mean, you really okay?
That's like a you and me moment.
Oh yeah, 100%. He's like, you could call that play, Gabriel, but I don't.
I wouldn't have gone there with it.
He'd been like, well, I'm not you.
Yeah.
Okay, Gabriel.
Yeah, well, I'm not the Almighty, so.
I'm not Jesus. All right. So I completely understand. Like I think that's an accurate portrayal. You'd be terrified to go back here. Mm-hmm. What did Paul say? Because he had a trip to the third heaven, and he said, I saw things that are not lawful to speak. He said in 2 Corinthians that the stuff that he was seeing was so crazy that if he were to try to communicate it, it would be unlawful because he'd be bearing false witness because he wouldn't be able to use the words to communicate well what he was seeing.
Wow. Who said that?
Paul,
Wow.
what are you wowing about? That's a pretty famous passage.
I don't remember it right now.
Yeah, he said, I knew a man, 13 years ago, he's caught up to the third heaven, da-da-da-da-da. He's talking about himself.
I remember that.
He said, I saw things unlawful to speak.
I didn't know what that meant.
Oh, okay.
Wow, that's crazy.
Well, what did you think the phrase meant?
I don't know. I probably just skipped over it because I was more focused on caught up to the third heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
It's so weird.
What, Vin? What?
Yeah, so this has... So I'm going to have a call with Ian at some point in the next week or two because I was saying that the more and more science I see, the less and less I believe in the category of what's called supernatural, and the more and more I believe the Bible. Mm-hmm. So we were listening to Graham Hancock
that's what I was
and
thinking.
Joe Rogan, and he was talking about and it's interesting because it says misled by science here, but which I don't necessarily, I actually don't think it's possible to be misled by science, but I'll explain that in a second. But they were talking about
misled by science right there.
Yeah, they were talking about how there was this guy, and there's debate about gradualism versus catastrophism and all this, and then there was this one guy who basically said that there was a massive flood that destroyed a whole bunch of stuff and whatever, and then people were mocking him and all the rest of it, and then but toward the end of his life, the guy actually won an award because it turned out that one of his little theories was correct or something, and then he basically said, all my enemies are dead, so I can't gloat over them or whatever. And the other scientists actually said that the reason that they resisted this catastrophist theory was because it sounded too much like the Bible.
That's crazy, right?
And the Epic of Gilgamesh and all this, and of course Rogan's like, well, can't we look at it like something actually did happen, and these myths or whatever came about to kind of explain what was happening? And then of course all the Kemetic stuff over there in Egypt, where the Egyptians were saying that they were a legacy. In other words, that the gods had come and established their culture, and then they, whatever, inherited or whatever. You see, Graham Hancock, he's not a Christian. He doesn't have a Judeo-Christian worldview. The guy's a, But it was just fascinating watching these guys have this discussion. Yeah. And then, before that, I was watching this panel that was headed up by Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Okay.
Master physicist, probably the most popular physicist. And then you had this Harvard physicist, and then you had a philosopher, and you had like 4 or 5 other people, and they were talking about the simulation theory of the universe, that the universe is a simulation. And some of it was really interesting because basically they were talking about how, when you do a computer program, there's sort of like this sort of algorithm or whatever, and then they're like, hey, we observe this algorithm in nature, and people are like, what the hell? And then around like the 27 to 32 minute mark, the guy, one of the physicists, and it was weird because a couple of them were wearing sunglasses inside, which was very strange to me, but I guess that's like a thing with cool scientists or whatever. The guy said, well, if the simulation theory is true, then this opens up the door to eternal life.
One of the first non-physicists that I read reflected on my comment said, this is not exact words, but effectively he said, if the simulation hypothesis is valid, we open the door to eternal life and resurrection and things that formerly have been discussed in the realm of religion. And the reason is really quite simple. If you think about a computer, if we are a simulation and we're like programs in a computer, as long as I have a computer that's not damaged, I can always rerun the program. So if you really believe that we are in a simulation and there's some structure that runs that simulation, unless something damages that structure, then we can be repurposed. It starts to break down a very funny barrier between what people often think is the conflict between science and the conflict between faith.
And of course, all the very post-Aristotelian, very intelligent scientists were like, whoa, and all the rest of it. It was a very awkward, uncomfortable moment, and I was like, yeah. But it's crazy to me because it's like, I'm sitting there watching these guys, and the conversation wasn't about God. It was just about the simulation theory. And of course, to me, there was a 9 trillion pound elephant in the room, which is, if it is a simulation, somebody built it.
Yeah.
So, and then they were talking about.
And when I think of simulation, I think, so there's a simulation, but then there's also something outside of the simulation.
There has to
be.
be.
Which is obviously what we're saying is God. And
Right.
also something that is more real than the simulation.
Correct. Right. So you got Hebrews 12 that says, we look to the things that are unseen, not the things that are seen, because the things that are seen are temporary and what is unseen is eternal.
Yeah.
And then that is communicating that the unseen reality is actual reality in this. And then you have language like the sky will roll up like a scroll or whatever. And, in modern parlance, if we would rewrite it's funny because John was talking about a modern rewrite of the Bible. If you rewrote the Bible and said the hologram will disintegrate and you will see reality for what it is, and a modern person would, in the last 20 years could understand that, but people in the ancient Near East cannot.
Right.
And so it was just a fascinating discussion watching these guys talk. And I know that they don't have like the minutiae of the scripture that I have, I'm assuming, but they're coming in from it from a scientific perspective, and it's like. And one of them was talking about basically.
Wow, that'd be crazy.
There was another video as well. I'll try to find the links to all these so that you guys can join in on these. Just watch these discussions.
To have a you-like character within that discussion would be pretty crazy.
Well, yeah, because they had a philosopher there, and the guy was a philosophy guy. He obviously he was not a Christian.
Yeah.
But it was very fascinating when that guy brought that up, and because he was right. I mean, that does open the door for a lot of what we have been saying for thousands of years.
Yeah.
But there's this sort of, the supposed animus between science and faith. But to me, so like the more and more I look at this, and then you think about DMT, right? And, we talked about this in another video where...
Where are you going with this?
Well, think about DMT, right? Dimethyltryptamine, I think it is. And Joe Rogan was, I'm pretty sure it was Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan was amazed at the odds that these people, these ancient Amazonians, were able to find the DMT and then the ayahuasca leaf.
Yeah, I remember you talked about that.
That shuts off the valve so that you can have a longer DMT experience.
Right, and they said that character from inside the experience told them.
Right, it was like 1 in 100,000 or something like that. Like the odds are crazy. And he's like, how did you... And then, I think it was Dennis McKenna, Terrence McKenna's brother, said... these people say that the spirits that they meet up there directed them specifically to that plant and da-da-da-da-da, and that's been the only story of how they found it. And of course, they found this thousands of years ago. This has been an ancient practice. How do we don't know. You know what I mean? But it, and then this is gonna get me in trouble with the Christians. I talked about this last week, when they unearthed this ancient temple in Jerusalem or Israel. I think it was in Hebron. And they found cannabis in one of the temples or whatever. And so...
It surprised me, but it didn't surprise me.
Right, when you look at... Yeah, I mean, I can clearly see it. I can absolutely see that happening because God told them over and over again not to adopt the practices of the Canaanites or whatever. But the term for sorcery in the New Testament is pharmakia, which sounds like pharmacy, where you get drugs, right? That's the etymological root for the English word pharmacy, or the drugstore. And so the term for sorcery is pharmakia. And so, wouldn't you know it, we've got scientific documented evidence where people are having life-changing experiences by using these drugs as conduits to some other dimension. And you got some people saying, yeah, it's all in your head, and then you got other people going, credentialed scientists and people don't really know what's going on with DMT. You get the pineal gland, and you've got DMT in your body, and there's DMT all over the place. But there was a question that Joe Rogan was asking one of these guys, and they were saying, is this, I think it was Graham Hancock, or it was Dennis McKenna, Terrence McKenna's brother, and he's like, Terrence McKenna said explicitly in that book True Hallucinations, which you can find on. I'll try to find all of these links and give them to you. This is stuff I'm listening to at 4, 5, 6 in the morning. But he was talking about how he believes that these are real beings. And he speculates as to what they were. Like maybe it's us in the future. Maybe it's the spirits of the dead. Maybe it's,
The ones that they meet when they go into that experience?
Yeah, the machine elves or the lady. If you're talking about ayahuasca, Amazon stuff, they're always talking about the lady. There's this woman, there's this female entity, mega powerful, and everybody talks about, and it's like they have a relationship with her, yada yada yada. It's crazy stuff. And McKenna was basically saying, like they relate. That's their mother. She gives them direction. She tells them what to do. Yada yada yada.
So she's good in these situations.
Well, in their mindset, she's good. In our mindset, we would probably say she's not good.
Yeah.
And so when God says don't, and it's interesting because there was one episode where they were talking about it, and they were saying.
First of all, there's no way in the world if some spirit came to me and told me to smoke 2 things, I would never do it.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's not even smoking it. You have to boil it. And then you do all this.
I wouldn't do it. But
well, yeah, I know you wouldn't do it.
I mean, I feel like you might.
Yeah.
Not me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But they were. It's the same thing that happened with like End of the Sphere. I read a book one time. I was with this group, and they were actual missionaries, and they were going in a really bad place. And I mean, these people were hardcore. They were like ready to die. I mean, you know me. If I'm going to be around, it's going to be people like. Some of them actually did die. Some pretty high-profile deaths in Libya a couple years ago. So rest in peace to the big homie. But I mean, he knew what he signed up for, so I don't feel bad for him. But so they gave me this book, and in the book, it was these people in Papua New Guinea, and in this book, they were saying that there were 2 spirits, and one spirit was like the spirit that had basically they've been worshiping for generations and generations, and then they would talk about a bad spirit that they could see. So they'd say, you see up there, and the villagers could see, and they're like, that guy is really, really bad. And so the missionary is like, well, what's he look like? And they were like, well, he's very, very bright, and he's got a bunch of lights around him, and yada, yada, yada. And so the missionary's like, he opens Revelation, and he starts reading Revelation to these, and they go, yeah, and they freaked out. They all broke. They all ran, and they were like, that's the enemy, blah, 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 blah. So the missionary goes back and goes, well, I'm a representative of that guy. So they were like, they had to make it like they had to come down to a thing and decide whether or not they were going to kill him.
That's what I was thinking.
They had to have a little, whatever. It was mind-boggling. But these are people who had been taking these substances, right? And so they were opened up to another type of dimension, and they could see. It was just very weird.
Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah, and I was like, of course, I'm looking at it like completely from a spiritual perspective. So I'm like, yeah, sure, that happened, and good story. They converted, yada yada yada, and then the dark spirit basically left them, and they basically said they couldn't see him anymore, but they could see him in their chest, which I guess it was like he's in their heart or something like that. I guess. But it was, so at the time I was looking at it, I was like, oh, that's very spiritual. But then when I start hearing about DMT, I go, okay, like there is, I just put that all in the supernatural category. Like it's just supernatural. But then you look at DMT and I'm like, wait a second. What if these people are taking these substances, which are because it's like I said in the other video, there's physics, there's a physical universe, and then there's the metaphysical world, right? So the physical world is where, time, space, dimensions, yada, 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 matter, air, whatever. And the metaphysical world is the abode of morality, the laws of logic, spirituality, the soul, the mind, yada, yada, yada. Those are not the same.
Right.
And science can tell us about this, but science has nothing to do with this. As a matter of fact, science is dependent on metaphysics. The scientific method is dependent on the laws of logic, which is not in the physical universe, it's in the metaphysical universe. So science doesn't inform this, right? So I'm thinking to myself, like, you know, I always had them in these boxes, and I'm like, wait a second, what if there's a confluence? So what if God put DMT and things like that in the world, and it's an access point to open you up to another dimension? And then, of course, then you think about the forbidden fruit, and they ate something which then gave them some sort of revelatory power that they did not know before, right? Like, so then, like, the gap between the supernatural and natural has become more and more small to me. It's like Jesus is walking on water. Well, what if Jesus found a way telepathically to manipulate the atoms in such a way that he could walk on them? Like, that's scientifically, like, you could see that happen in a science fiction movie, like if a person was that advanced. Yeah. Right? And of course, if he's God, then obviously. So I'm watching all this stuff, and I'm like, yo, this is crazy. This is crazy stuff, because then I'm like, I don't really know how much then is actually supernatural. So one of the things that they were talking about was basically, in order for this hologram thing to work, you would have to basically have a computer the size of a planet. So like it was very. I think I've got that in our history. I'll show it to you, but. You would have to have the processing power of a planet so that it could project off that hologram and make you live in the world and experience that and think that you're actually experiencing it and yada yada yada.
Yeah,
and they were saying,
why again?
Go ahead.
If it's a hologram, then that's not really there. Like, that means I think about stuff like this, you know, periodically. Like, how could you ever have a mistake?
What do you mean?
Like, you know when you trip and you didn't expect to trip and all of a sudden, boom, you hit the ground?
Right.
Like, how could that happen if you're in a hologram?
Well, I mean, if the hologram is programmed to create those eventualities, then they're going to happen. Especially as a Calvinist. The hologram
determines that you're going to trip?
Yeah, especially as a Calvinist. I mean, that works perfectly, right? Because you believe that God decreed everything. So God, you know, has this supercomputer planet somewhere, and he's put it all in there, like Farrakhan says. He's a scientist. Like, that's a very interesting thing, because in Nation of Islam, like, it's about science and mathematics. Yeah. And they mock, you know, regular Christian doctrine. They say, oh, you're saying God's a spook because you're saying God's a spirit. And in their mind, God is an actual, like, physical, but he's like a hyper advanced scientist. And so what's the difference between saying God programmed the hologram such that you would trip on a Tuesday? What's the difference between saying that and saying God decreed that you would trip on a Tuesday? What's the difference?
Yeah, but a hologram is not actually real.
Well, again, the term isn't hologram, it's simulation. That's the term that they use, is simulation. So you're in a simulation and you
But
think
it's a
this
highly
stuff is
advanced simulation. It's not like the games you play where you can't actually touch that wall. You can't actually...
Well, it's and they bring up physics here, and there is a very controversial experiment in physics. Yeah, quantum physics, actually. Quantum physics leads us to answers to the great taboos. So in quantum, so there's this whole theory. Remember we talked about this, that basically the way that the particles were behaving was that if they were not observed, they weren't there, but then when you would observe them, they would be there. And so people are like, right? Oh, we figured this shit out, like something's going on here. People are like, yo, something's going on. Because there was one of them that was saying it looks like that these things have a mind of their own type of thing, which is impossible in our current understanding of how the world supposedly works. So, and I'm not really, like, there's a lot of work that I have to do on that to, like, even believe that, even though I see the experiment, I see the fancy people, but my thing is, if a car, I've been hit by a car before and I had no idea it was coming.
That's what I'm saying. Like that,
So I didn't observe that shit, and of course the person could say, well, the person driving the car observed the car,
or
so it existed to them.
So it existed. Observing the whole thing.
Well, exactly. That's the thing, is that if matter can only exist because of observation, then who the hell is observing everything keeps everything together?
That wouldn't work, though, because then it wouldn't work in the experiments, because when it's not observed, it would still be observed.
Right. Well, as far as we know. But yeah, it's very, very straight. My point is, I always chuckle you know, people send me some article from Scientific Today or whatever, and they're like, this explains definitively why this happens. I'm like, are you serious? We got stuff like that going around, and you really believe that one article answers? It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
People want it to be that simple sometimes.
Yeah. And so when it says, you know, misled by science, I think, you know, when I was watching that whole thing happen, and Joe Rogan was asking the guy, like, about the flood catastrophes and stuff. Joe Rogan is a truth seeker. He doesn't care, because you could still say a global flood happened and it got recorded by these ancient peoples because, you know, whatever, and they try to put their God around it because it's fine, but these people are like holding on to this ideology. If you watch the Joe Rogan thing, you'll see, like, and I've said this to people over and over again, scientists are not androids. They're not, you know, these just idea machines and people without biases or prejudices who don't want certain things to be true or want things to be. Of course they are. They're regular people. Of course there's things they want to be true and things they do. And then when your sponsorship and your grants are on the line and all this other stuff, there's a whole bunch of things that affect what scientists tell us. Like, for example, during the slavery days, you had peer-reviewed scientific documents that were saying that blacks were closer to apes than humans, that, you know, the jaw structure and all this made them closer to apes than humans. This was peer-reviewed scientific information. And obviously, their zeitgeist influenced how they interpreted the data. So people who, like, when Roman Catholics, this is why I could never be a Catholic, and the same thing C.S. Lewis said to his buddy, I could never be a Catholic because you have to surrender your mind to the magisterium. Sorry, Jake, but it's true. You know it's true. You know I'm right. You have to surrender your mind to the magisterium. And I could be an atheist the way some atheists are because they surrender their mind to the scientific community as if the scientific community is this infallible group of people who have the greatest handle on ultimate reality. Sorry, that's not true. It's just not. I can bring up instance after instance after instance where that has not been the case. So I don't think we can be misled by science. If we only use a scientific method to look at data, it's impossible to be misled because they're operating from the laws of logic. We can be misled by the scientific community, though. We can be misled by scientists, which obviously the people in the antebellum South in the 1800s were. When they were, I mean, you would come and you would say, these are human beings. They've got a head, 2 hands, 2 legs. They're just like us. Da 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 da. And you would be able to pull up the best scientists of the day with peer-reviewed documents that says, I know they look like that, but they're not. They're closer to apes than human beings. And so I don't believe you can be misled by science, but you absolutely can be misled by the scientific community based on what's happening in the culture, for sure.
Yeah.
And so,
that makes sense.
And so,
more accurate.
You know, we keep trying to put these different disciplines at war with each other. But if one informs the other, then that's the way forward. So for example, if you've got a scientist that says, they're humans like us, but they're closer to apes and animals, the theologian can say, no, they're image bearers of God. So we're not playing around with that. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, you know, Sam Harris talks about this, the weakness of religion is that they have these fixed ideas that can never change over time no matter what information you got, and that's the strength of science. And I would say, that is the strength and the weakness of science, is the malleable nature of scientific interpretation based on the current zeitgeist that you're in. The slavery one's a perfect example, where you had a scientific justification for a horrible atrocity. Yeah. And so if you had some theology around it that said, well, no, they're image bearers of God, so there's a theology, and then the morality you pull from that is, because they're image bearers of God, everybody needs to be treated equally. Right. So no matter what the scientist says here, we're not going to make, there's nothing to protect you from making that mistake. Right. If theology and morality do not inform your scientific understanding, right? And so, and obviously I disagree with Harris that religion can't self-correct, because really the Civil War was a battle between biblical interpretations. You had a lot of Christians on the ground saying, John Brown, for example, saying slavery is wrong. These are image bearers of God. But then you had other people saying, well, no, because you could have slaves in the Old Testament. And then the response was, yeah, but now we're in the New Testament and we need to restore the world to be Eden, and this is not Edenic. And they were saying, yeah, I know, and I know we're not going to go back to the Old Testament, but I still have a bunch of passages. And so really the Civil War was really about one theological position overtaking another on the ground. Now, there were political aspects as well, but if you read the diaries of what was happening in the North and the South as far as a common soldier, as far as what was happening rhetorically in the abolitionist debates, these were theological debates. There's actually a book about this, where the guy framed it as a theological crisis. So I disagree with Harris that religion can't correct itself, because it does self-correct that's how you ended up with the Western world. And that's why in the Western world, it was the Christians who led the forefront of abolishing slavery. It was homeboy over there in England. What's his name? I keep forgetting.
I know.
William Wilberforce.
Oh, yes.
It was William Wilberforce in England, and it was his Christianity that was the impetus for that. And of course, in America, you had John Brown and abolitionists and all that, and it was a Christian thing. And yeah, they fought against other Christians, but that's an example where theology actually does self-correct in certain circumstances. So, this song was really, really fascinating to me, because the dichotomy that people keep making between science and religion, and the natural versus supernatural, which is, I'm probably on an island with this here. I'm not really certain that there are many things that are, or anything that are supernatural, in the sense that I'm not certain that there is anything that does not have a scientific explanation other than the Most High. And I think that's probably...
You just think our science is not advanced enough to be able to define it.
Right.
Understand it.
Right. We're kids, right? So when God writes the Bible, he's going to say, okay, I said this, da, da, da. He's not going to say, I created the simulation and there's this other planet that's functioning as a super server that's giving you this projection. What? Like, you're saying that to ancient Near Eastern people? Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, obviously not. Like, we can't get that at 2020. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think, was it? I think it was Calvin, or is it Jonathan Edwards, that basically said that God babbles to us in the Bible, in the sense that, you're a baby, and so when a baby talks, it's like Orion. He's got a word or two here, and you go blah, 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 and you get down to where he is, so that he can, you speak in one or two word things, so that he can understand what you're saying. Because the big thing is, I want a relationship with Orion. So I'm not necessarily trying to give him a jot and tittle understanding of like the world around him. What's important to me is my relationship to him. So God sets us up in this simulation so that we can have a relationship with him. And so he's not going to explain the inner machinations of how he does everything, because that's not his point. His point is, let's set you up in the simulation for whatever, and the simulation reveals your heart. Right? So that the whole point of being in the simulation is to put you in situations where your heart gets revealed, so that you know who you actually are, and then you know who he is. So the simulation is really not, it's incidental to God's ultimate goal, which explains why in Hebrews it says the unseen, we set our eyes on the things that are unseen. And it even says in Hebrews, when it was talking about the temple and stuff, it says that the temple was just a shadow of God's heavenly temple. That what the instructions that God gave Moses was just basically a copy of what was up there.
Yeah.
And but the temple up there is the actual real temple. So, and then of course, if you want to get really meta with it, in The Temple and the Church's Mission by G.K. Beale, G.K. Beale argues that the temple is just a microcosm of the planet. That the temple was supposed to be the planet. Okay, so then if the temple is just a copy of the real, and the temple is supposed to be the world, then the world is simply a simulation of the real. And so that's why by the end of Hebrews he says, we fix our eyes on the unseen because what is unseen is eternal and what is here is going to be passing away and the sky is going to roll up like a scroll and da-da-da-da, which if you rewrote the Bible, it would simply mean we fix our mind on the outside of reality because inside we're in the matrix, and one of these days God is going to disintegrate the matrix and then we're going to see life as it actually is, like Neo. And so instead of, you would have, if you wrote a modern Bible, you would have a bunch of cultural markers to where people would say, oh, okay. So like the Bible would say that, instead of saying what is unseen is eternal, it would say, okay, you're all in the matrix. And immediately, culturally, we would get it. Mm-hmm. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But if you're writing to people 2,000 years ago,
right,
you're going to say the sky's going to roll up like a scroll.
Right.
And then you have sort of like this figure in your head of, oh, that's what it means. So, anyway. I'm ranting here.
That's interesting.
But the point is I don't really see much difference between what we call supernatural and science. I just think I think the term supernatural is just a placeholder for until we can figure out how God accomplished that thing under the hood. So like when I see a rainbow and people go, rainbow has nothing to do with God, it's just lights, going through it's like, no, that's just how God did it.
So there's nothing in the Bible that uses language like supernatural.
No, there's no such term like that in the Bible, supernatural. I mean, again, you hear the term.
What's a miracle?
Well, to me, a miracle is when God introduces an anomaly into the matrix. Right, so in the current simulation we're in, if somebody punctures your eye to the point where, it's inoperable, right? That's how things go. Your eye gets punctured, it's inoperable. That's normal. That's going to happen 99 out of 100 times. What Jesus does when he heals somebody is all he's doing is reprogramming the matrix in such a way that an anomaly happens that doesn't normally occur. But that doesn't mean it was done by magic. That's what I'm saying is, like for example, turning water into wine, for example. God always turns water into wine. That's how you get wine, right? Like, you need rain and branches and then the fermentation process. So when Jesus does that miracle in John 2, I don't think it's woo-woo. It's just he has a way of telepathically kickstarting that process, the fermentation process, in such a way as to make that happen instantaneously, is something that should have taken 6, 7, 8 months. So he just kickstarted that process.
And some seeds.
Right. So he's not going to sit there and say, all right, guys, this is what happened, okay? I made this entire simulation. I know how everything goes, and I introduced an anomaly into this matrix. For what? Mm-hmm. All they know is that this guy is able to dominate nature in such a way that we've never seen before. Right? That's all. So is that supernatural? Yeah, I mean, I just look at it as it's an anomaly in the Matrix. And you see this in the Matrix, where Neo, once he figures it out, is able to manipulate certain things in the Matrix because they're bend the spoon, yada yada yada, right? Which kind of goes to the theory that he never really left the Matrix because he's still able to do all that supernatural shit outside of the Matrix, supposedly, which I never thought he actually left the Matrix, but that's a whole different discussion. So, yeah, I mean, and there was that one moment when he comes to the reality, when he's looking all of them and he sees all the zeros and ones, and he figures it out. And it to me, it's like Jesus, when he was walking, knew that immediately.
Yeah.
Like he saw the world as it actually was, and he was able to reorient things in such a way as to get that desired result, whatever he needed to do. And so when I'm sitting here watching these brilliant physicists really considering maybe the whole thing's a hologram or a simulation, I'm like, come on, bro. Like, it to me,
wow.
So the gap between science and faith is very small to me, almost non-existent. And like I said, the only thing that is ultimately supernatural would be the ontology of God himself, in the sense that he's the only being that is ultimate reality, that is not contingent on any other reality. which is the entire point of the burning bush, right? Is that this fire is happening, but it's not consuming the bush because it's not subsisting any energy from the bush. It's its own energy, and so that's what makes God God. But God's actions in the physical world, again, I do not think are, because I think the Nation of Islam is right in the sense that God is a scientist, in the sense that he always uses means. Even when he was flooding the world, it says, he opened the fountain.
He sets all the rules, but he's outside of all of it.
Correct. But most of the time, he acts within those laws. So, for example, he's parting the Red Sea. It says he sent a great wind and da-da-da-da-da. It doesn't say that he came down and chopped it with his hand. Like, he used the natural means in order to make that happen. And so... So that's why I don't know if Ian. Ian. That was pretty much going to be our entire conversation. I don't really think.
Well, now you know where he's coming from.
Yeah, and so I think if all that stuff is true, that has a lot of implications to what they're talking about here. Nothing here will be the same. And you know what else was interesting? Right before, I think it was Ebert died. You remember Siskel and Ebert?
It sounds familiar, but I don't know.
So, you ever heard the term 2 thumbs up, 2 thumbs down? Mm-mm. I give this 2 thumbs up or 2 thumbs down?
Oh, yeah.
Do you or do you not?
It sounds familiar, but it's not like I saw anything that they...
Yeah.
I might have just heard people referencing 2 thumbs up.
Yeah. So that was them. It was Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, and they were critics. And so they would judge a movie, and you'd get a thumb up and thumb down, da-da-da-da-da-da.
Okay. Were they together? Or
they were best friends. Yeah, they were best friends. They're 2 dudes. They were best friends. Yeah. And so they're both dead now. But he wrote something, and it was pretty crazy when, right before he died.
Is that him too?
What
did he get, cancer in his jaw?
Yeah, he got cancer, and I think he got cancer or whatever. But he said something to her that was really, really, really interesting. And I'm trying to find it here. This is what Roger Ebert said to his girl, the day before he died, I think, actually, or the week before. She said, the one thing people might be surprised about, Roger said that he didn't know if he could believe in God. He had his doubts. But toward the end, something really interesting happened. That week before Roger passed away, I would see him and he would talk about having visited this other place. I thought he was hallucinating. I thought they were giving him too much meds. But the day before he passed away, he wrote me a note. Okay, so this is the day before he dies. This is all an elaborate hoax. I asked him, what's a hoax? And he was talking about this world, this place. He said it was all an illusion. I thought he was just confused, but he was not confused. He wasn't visiting heaven, not the way we think of heaven. He described it as a vastness that you can't even imagine. It was a place where the past, present, and future were all happening at once. So, this is a guy doesn't believe in God, or he's struggling to believe in God, maybe. Toward the end, people start, you start realizing your mortality. But he says, this is all an elaborate hoax. So, you got that experience, you got Hebrews, you got the scientists.
Wow.
And so, what it does is, it makes me believe a lot less in the category of supernatural, a lot more in science, and a lot more in the Bible.
Yeah.
Because
that's pretty interesting.
That's what you would expect. And then when he says it wasn't heaven, he's talking about the Sistine Chapel. The idea you go to this floaty place,
Clouds.
And of course, Minister Farrakhan will come in and say, I told you God wasn't a spook, and It's really, really fascinating stuff.
That really is.
Really is, and it's if you do enough reading, and that's one of the benefits of being an insomniac. And my buddy John is the guy who sent us this song is also an insomniac. There's a lot of, and he had experience, and I don't know if he's gonna share it or wants to share it. Oh, by the way, congratulations to I gotta congratulate the winner of the shirt. Usually when we do a very, very, very long review, I'll put a number out there.
I just remember the last name, but we're not putting out last names.
Yeah. You put a number out. I put a number out there, and if you guess the number, you get a free shirt. So, I don't know who got it, but somebody messaged me and he said he got the shirt, but I don't know. He just messaged me his whatever. So I can't congratulate the guy because I can't find him. But anyway, I'll find you. Congratulations on the shirt. This was a very long review. This is probably the favorite review I've ever had in probably the last 365 days because it's collapsing all these different ideas that I had.
Yeah.
And you know, in Inception, the way you get out of those dreams is you have to die. You die in the movie Inception. You die, and then you. Oh, I think that's him. Actually, it's the same guy. Is it? This guy thanked me. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna send him a shirt too. So shout out to Eric. He goes, "Thank you guys for this. I needed it."
Aww.
So how could you not give him a shirt after that?
Yeah.
And he's got the address and all that, and nobody ever gives us a size. If you have this contest, you gotta give us.
Send a size.
Send us a size, sir. So I'm gonna give him a shirt. Well, I'll give the other guy a shirt too. Send me an email. Okay, so here's what we'll do for this one. Send me an email as to your understanding of what we just talked about.
Yeah. VinandSori@gmail.com.
And I will over the next 7 days figure out the best one, and you two will win a shirt. Maybe I'll read it on air if you're good with that. But anyway, it's a very, very good song, very good metal, and
it was
an amazing.
It was a 10 for sure.
This is another 11 for me.
I'll throw in with you an 11.
This is a back-to-back 11s. The NoFX song was an 11 for me, and this song is an 11 for me. It's a really, really good song. I pretty much agree with almost all of it. Again, I don't think science can lead us wrong. I don't think we can ever be misled by science. I think science is what God has given us to kind of bridge that gap to the ultimate oneness. I really believe that. So, but definitely we can be misled by the institutions of science for sure, and we have. And then you've got some Latin in here. Non intelligens nihil explicus. I'm assuming that no mind can explain is what that means. Vider nolens nihil capies non nihil explicus incognita non vides. Something about life or something like that. I think it's no mind can explain. You know when Paul says no eye has seen or ear has heard the things that God has planned for us, blah blah blah. So anyway,
prepared for those who love Him.
Yep, that's a good one. So you should love God. Yeah, and I just think that I think you find all of these can be married to a Christian worldview, and I love me some Jesus, and he's Jesus for me. He's the ultimate Neo. Figures all of it out, you know what I mean, and he's gonna bring us out into ultimate reality. And I like, when Neo has that experience, and then what's his face, Morpheus quotes that philosopher when he says, "Welcome to the desert of the real." And so Neo opens up into this world, and it's just a desert because it's an unkept type of thing.
Yeah.
But when we wake up, Jesus is going to say, "Welcome to the garden of the real," because the real world is actually a garden. It's not this junk of a mess that we've made in this horrible simulation. So anyway, just a lot of parallels, and you're gonna have a hell of a time making this thumbnail because I don't know how you're gonna justify all these amazing concepts, but you're gonna have to make the thumbnail of your life.
I feel like you're gonna be like, not good enough.
Not good enough.
Not good enough.
Not
Babe,
good enough.
I'm pregnant. I'm tired. Let me go to bed.
I know. This is horrible. What a good song though. But
yeah,
the musicianship
really
was crazy. I just felt like this is a very, very important song for the catalog of metal.
Yep.
They took some riffs and reimagined the riffs and reapplied them in ways that I thought were extremely unique and just awesome, and I loved them. So there you go. My brother just congratulated me on our supposed 1.6 million subs.
I was like, you're a troll.
All right, guys. Vin out.
Sori out.
Gone. Shout out to Epica. Hey, send this to Epica. I'm trying to get an interview with these guys. Unbelievable song.
Shout out to John, who brought this to us.
Vin out.
Sorry, out.
Down.
It's right here. It's Chris, right?
Chris.
No! I was just gonna say that.
Well, I already did the Vin out, sorry out thing.
I know, but I was gonna put it in there because.
Well, you can put the bleep. You can say bleep because I have a bleep thing.
Okay, so it's going to Chris.
Going to Chris and it's going to Eric.
Yep, there he is. I remember the last name.